Good evening and welcome to our June edition of Classic Car Restoration Club live Q&A. And I'm Mark Simpson. I'm joined today by Ross Keel and Terry Wright. We hope you get like a lot of good questions. You know, it's finally warming up outside, but here in Minnesota, it's like, even though it's warm outside, it's like really smoky outside here today. So if you're not affected by all the Canadian wildfires, you're better off because it's really smoky outside today. It is bad. It is bad. Hopefully everybody's getting out, enjoying your cars like we're supposed to, and getting to a few car shows, getting a little inspiration, getting jazzed up. You know, this is the time of year you get fueled up to, keep you going the rest through the winter months when we don't get to enjoy our cars. So, I know we've attended a few car shows so far and got a lot more on the docket, and it should be a good season. Down below the question box here, there's a little box for there's a terminology guide that we have as a free download. Feel free to click on that, download it. It's free. We got something we put together that kind of shows, some of the jargon and stuff. If you're new to the hobby, or sometimes there's just a few things you have questions about. Kind of a good resource. Go ahead and click on that. If you want to ask a question, just above that terminology guide, there's a little narrow box, kind of a little maroon box. You can just type your question in there. There's way down in the corner, there's a little button called chat. And that's just to talk to customer service representatives if you have no billing question or you want to renew or whatever. That's your link to the customer service people. Not really the link for the Q&A. So you go right in the box below the chat box here. That's where to type in your questions. Go ahead and get as many questions in now. I appreciate as many as we can get. I always enjoy, having a bunch of them queued up because then we can, keep moving and keep the flow. We've also got some questions that have come in via email. Terry had a gentleman that was having trouble logging in tonight, of all things, and but he sent his question direct to Terry, and we'll get to him shortly. I know Paul. He was nice enough to get his question in first. He gets the award. Ding, ding, ding. We're gonna get started right away on yours, Paul. And he writes, when replacing a partial quarter panels and butt welding the seams, what's the best filler to use on the weld area that will not crack, shrink, etc. over time and give the best results? Of course, we're going to put this right to our body and paint guy first and get the pro feedback here.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, if it's butt welded, it should look like it wasn't butt welded, right? It should look like the rest of the metal. So there's really no reason you can't put any current filler over it.
Well, yeah, that's providing it was metal finished. So you can butt weld something and still have,
So if there's if it's porous a little bit where there's little
pinholes, maybe not porous. It may just be. But you bring up, we can touch on that. But maybe a lot of times if something's butt welded, especially if you're not expert metal guy, there's still a little bit of distortion there, a little bit of weld grind or whatever there that most guys put some sort of skim coat over.
Yeah, and then I would put a waterproof type filler, like a fiberglass reinforced type filler.
Okay.
Instead of your regular plastic filler that will absorb moisture. Mm-hmm. The fiberglass type fillers won't do that, so that'll help seal out. It won't absorb water, so that'll help. So in case there is something in the back, it'll get through. They're all pretty flexible now, so I guess I wouldn't hesitate to use anything that's current.
Mm-hmm.
But I would maybe first skim it with that waterproof filler.
Yep.
First, just in case. And that's actually what I did on mine. I didn't butt weld mine, but I still did that because I'm not a good welder, and I know I had voids. So
This isn't like some kind of confessions area here.
it's all right. It's all right. It's real world. But yeah, I wouldn't hesitate to use anything that's current filler over it. I don't see any reason why anything wouldn't work.
Yeah, and I think a lot of guys will say, right, even if it looks like there's no porosity or anything in the weld, a lot of the pro shops will still recommend putting a skim coat of something that's not like a regular Bondo filler, because the Bondo will absorb moisture and then start bubbling and all that. But like something like a Duraglass or something like that is not affected by water.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly what I would use.
And just putting, and I know a lot of pro shops that will just put a thin skin coat over the weld area, then they'll come back and just feather in, do a big, either a skim coat of a body filler on the panel, or use the heavy primer filler,
Yep, polyester primer.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what I would do. I mean, if it was perfect, in a perfect world, you wouldn't have any porosity there, and it would look just like you didn't weld it.
Yep.
But
yeah, when it's done, when a butt weld's done really well, it looks like the metal. You see. I know, Rain Man. When he's all done with a panel, it's like you can't see the edges anymore. But he's done it for years, and he's not, a novice at it. So, but ideally, you can't see it. But that's not common world. Most guys just learning the butt weld stuff. A lot of times there's little, you can still see the edge, or there's maybe there's enough weld buildup still because they've TIG welded it or MIG welded it, so there's still some weld there on the edge, even though they've ground it close to flat. Mm-hmm. They still don't want to tear up the base metal by grinding too much on sheet metal. But I think another point to make is maybe, even though you've done it, okay, you can put your Bondos and fillers there. Probably most modern stuff is going to last. Mm-hmm. It's not such a bad idea to put something on the backside either.
I definitely put something on the backside. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. If you don't grind your welds down that smooth, you could have voids and gaps that can leave some sort of contamination in there too. And that was me. I wasn't perfect, so I actually went back after I was done grinding. I went and I sandblasted that weld just to get cleaned up any little pits that might have been there. Mm-hmm. But just to clean it up and help whatever I put over the top adhere to it. Way back when we brazed panels on, if you didn't get that flux off, nothing was sticking to it. It was terrible. And you could actually grind it nice and smooth, and you ground the flux into the weld and into the panel, and you still had problems. It was horrible before MIG welding.
Yep. Yeah. The old old brazing days. And I know a lot of the old lead slingers. Mm-hmm. Before they used to, they were using flux not only to do the brazing panels together, then they'd use more flux over the lead and then they'd throw on 90 coats of nitrogen lacquer, thick lacquer primers that would basically kind of seal everything up into some sort of there was a mill thickness was not an issue in those days. But modern techniques and supplies have come a long way in reducing a lot of those kind of issues and eliminating the need for flux and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Concerns with that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think you have any problem. Put the Duraglass type filler. So it's just it is plastic. Mm-hmm. Fiberglass reinforced is really what it is. But put that over that to seal that seam up, and then go ahead and put your body filler over that or your polyester prime, whatever. But should be fine.
Yep, I agree. The next question comes in from John. And John writes he's building a 1983 small block Chevy engine that came out of a truck. And he wants to put reworked heads from a 1972. So he got, like I said, probably small combustion chamber heads of a 72, and he wants to put those on this newer 83. Is there any problems with this?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, until you got up to the 90s, they didn't come out with the Vortec heads, and
Yeah.
that's the only. If they're that old, they should be.
Yeah,
intact. They should be
those,
existing.
set of 72 heads should fit everything from a 55 Chevy to all the way up to a 94 Chevy easily.
Yep.
And there are a few truck blocks that were built after that, and even they still make the small block Chevy and other forms today, even though the LS is real popular in production cars, the crate motors, there's a whole, we were just looking at it there. You can get a small block Chevy bored and stroked to a 454 right now. And it's like hard to believe you can get those kind of cubic inches out of that motor, but it's incredible.
A long stroke.
And big bores. Well, it's only because they have new castings for the blocks that allow them to have a bigger cylinder bores. But again, it's still impressive when you can get that small block package to put up that kind of cubic inches. But yeah, I don't see any problem.
Yeah, I think even the LT1 heads are still the same also.
Yeah.
So we kept the bolt patterns and the oil and water passages, they're all the same throughout. We kept that the same. And mess around with any of that?
Yeah, well, there are, there's some small differences. Like if on the 400,
they're not in different locations.
The 400 heads have steam holes in them because the pistons or the cylinders are Siamese together. Will they interchange? Yeah, you can put 350 heads on a 400. But a lot of times you're better off if you go back in and have them drilled for the steam vents on the 400 block so that you can keep them from running too hot. So there are some minor differences, but for the most part, the small block Chevy heads will work any small block Chevy. Further, let's see, what do we got going on? Let's going down the list. Rich writes, my 65 Chevy sport van has a straight six engine. Is this Rich SD? Is this
that's
Rich?
My buddy. That's my buddy. So he got it in.
You got through.
He got it put in.
Thanks,
Congratulations, Rich. You did great. Okay. My 65 Chevy sport van has a straight six engine. I put in an HEI distributor I got out of a mid-70s Nova, so I could have electronic ignition. I ran 12 volt to it rather than 6 volt. And it's been good. But I bet this distributor could use an overhaul. I did put in new weights and plastic bushings. I've heard there are places you can send them your distributor to give them a tune-up. What would that involve, and can I do it yourself? Can I do it myself? All right, let's hear from you guys. Start with you, Terry.
Well, I sent mine out to a guy that curved it, and I don't think he had to rebush it, but made sure the stop was, he welded up the stop so I had the right amount of advance, so there wasn't a bushing. But mine wasn't HEI, but I would imagine it's going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
Bushings can be worn out. I don't know if you can do that or not. I probably wouldn't, but yeah, you can definitely have them rebuilt. I'd stay away from aftermarket springs because I hear there's nothing but problems with those. Try to find factory springs, but you may be able to do it yourself. Rich, I'm gonna tell you, just sent it out. And I can give you the name of the guy I use here in Minnesota. And,
What are your thoughts?
I haven't done much work on distributors, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can do them too. There's so many different types of springs and, but bushings to me, you can almost feel it if they're worn.
They're worn.
Yeah.
You should be able to.
I have totally rebuilt everything on an MSD distributor because, taking out the shaft, replaced all the bearings and the bushings and the counterweight and everything else. I haven't done a stock distributor. When you hear, I think some guys get confused when they hear recurve and and just to give you an idea of what is a distributor curve. And all it does is it changes how quickly your distributor advances. It doesn't change total timing, and it doesn't change your initial timing. It just changes the curve in which how quickly it advances or how slow it advances. Depending on your driving needs, you may want it to advance quicker, or so bring it up to full advance at a faster rate at a lower RPM. Um, so when you reach full, maybe you want it set up so you reach your full advance at 2,500 RPMs, but maybe your engine set up for really high performance. Maybe you don't want it to reach full advance until you're at 3,500 RPMs or 5,000 RPM. That's basically what recurving it is. It's sort of meant to get the most out of the engine's performance by changing how quickly or how slowly you reach, how the advance curve kicks in, and how soon you reach full advance.
And most of the time when you do that, I don't know if he's got a vacuum advance, it'll take away the mechanical vacuum advance when you lock it, because then all your advances in your springs and your weights after that. So
and a lot of times, the vacuum advance is the helper, but the curve is set by the springs and weights.
Right. Anyway.
And but what I know, would I be afraid to tackle rebuilding a distributor? No. I would have to do a lot of research to make sure that I knew that the weights and springs that I was using were correct for my engine. Otherwise, you could have an engine that, goes to full advance too soon, and then suddenly your top end goes away, or one where it doesn't go into full advance soon enough, and you end up retarding your timing when you need more timing at that point. So there is a science to it. I know the guys that do it, they have a machine where they can check how quickly, they can dial it up and it spins a distributor, and they can see exactly, chart it all out, how fast and how slow, and what those, what that means to your engine. It may be a case where you could do it yourself, but you're going to end up, maybe making some, seat of the pants decisions that you'll have to change later or try to figure out what's going on.
And I think that comes in with there's a lot of different factors too, because if you've got a high performance motor, you almost going to have to experiment a little bit too with different setups. I mean, you can do with scenarios, a professional probably can do a scenario where you give them all your cam lift and, your compression and all that stuff, and then maybe they can decide what you can use in that.
And that's what the guy I sent mine to. I gave him all the stats of my engine and what it's all about. He's okay. Here you go. He said, "Here, set it at this initial and lock it in." The spring. What I'm hearing a lot about the springs is too light of springs. You start getting advanced while it's idling, and you start having idling issues. You're chasing. You think you have carburetor problems when you have distributor problems. But
that makes sense.
But
no, I think that's a great idea. If you know somebody who knows distributors, I mean, I've screwed around with that Chevelle.
You know,
Time.
your car, you grab the same distributor and you run it in 3 different motors right now, and and wondered why each one of them
But
has
it's an
different
MSD.
running problem.
MSD is a lot different than a regular distributor.
But the in that same regard, it may be a case where your distributor does need to have changes on it because it's probably it's essentially a gas setup right now. And maybe the because you're burning E85 in your big motors, maybe it needs more advanced quicker or later. I don't know.
I would say later,
But I would think that the fuel burning characteristics are different for E85 than they are for just straight gasoline, premium gasoline.
definitely.
So I would think there may be I don't, and that may be where a good distributor guy would come in. There's somebody who knows, performance in E85 engines and those kind of things. He would know if there needs to be a change on the curve of the distributor, so you don't have like flat spots in your timing or whatever.
I think a lot of that on mine is more
Owner issues.
No, I just believe that it's just more that carburetor is too big for the setup and that motor right now.
Oh,
You're
right
putting
now,
way too much fuel in there.
Yeah, he's got a 454 in his car now. It's a great motor, runs good and everything else, but it's just a little overstock kind of setup where the engine that he's got sitting on the stand over here is much higher compression and better, more aggressive cam and
Will
so
need more fuel.
and so there are they're very different engines, and even though they're both running on the 85, they both have distinctly different sounds as soon as you start them up, and you can tell the difference what a lot of compression makes to an engine. It changes the whole nature of the beast,
and it's not burning the fuel.
And now when he starts his engine up at car shows, nobody comes around to look at it.
Nope. He gets teased just like me.
Thanks, Rich.
Like it.
Maybe in a roundabout way, Rich, we finally got around to answering your question. He has a follow-up here. Perhaps they have a machine they can put them on to tune them, sort of like a time. Yes, they do. They do have there is a machine that will do it. If you find a good distributor guy, you can just give them your whole setup. And they can adjust your curve to fit your engine, especially if you've got a V8 distributor going into a 6-cylinder. Might be a case where you want to recurve that distributor to match that engine.
Yeah. And then, so did you find a guy locally?
Yep,
Oh,
sure did.
And he's in what, South Dakota?
San Diego.
San Diego.
San Diego.
Yeah, well, South Dakota is close to
It's that direction.
I'm looking at.
I know. He messed it up. No.
He comes back home once in a while. He can bring it with him.
Yeah, there you
go. Okay, Joel writes, he has a 1979 Trans Am with, we got any Pontiac guys here?
It depends. Does it have an old engine in it?
Yeah.
We might find out.
He has a 79 Trans Am with a non-working dash clock. I haven't had the dash out. Are these repairable, or does it have to be replaced? I would guess both. It could be repairable. I wouldn't see why it wouldn't be repairable.
Yeah, there's even quartz kits for those too. But if you wanted your regular old clock repaired, there's a guy in Ohio. His name's Pete Serial. He does Pontiac gauges. He's a guru. He's done mine. He would do that if he's not too busy, because he's a busy guy. But yeah, they can be rebuilt.
Yeah, and we have a video. There's also a guy in Bloomington that rebuilds, restores. He does all of the
Tax.
gauges for Bob Wilson at RJ Restoration. So we're talking, he does Boss 409 gauges and where he's not the fastest, but I can tell you this, when you see his restored gauges, they look like brand new. He re-silk screens the faces. He does all, and everything is like 100% correct. And you look at it and go, holy moly, it's a brand new looking gauge. So there are people out, and if you're interested in that one, I know we have some video on restoring gauges on Classic Car Restoration Club, and we did give the name of that company as well. And Terry's aware of somebody in Ohio that
he does a lot of Pontiac stuff.
does a lot of Pontiac stuff, so he's probably familiar with them as well. And then I always go 79 is not that old for me, I say, because I get to probably find a brand new one that's still in the box somewhere too, with a little bit of legwork, because I find brand new stuff for 57 DeSotos that are still in the box. I find brand new stuff for 31 DeSotos in the box.
I'll be surprised if my brother doesn't chime in here on his 78 Trans Am. His clock still works to this day.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
He can't adjust the time, so he's got to disconnect the battery at the right time. But it still works to this day.
Well, that's kind of working.
It keeps time, right? It works.
So I would think you really know aftermarket stuff has that stuff, like year one or.
Oh, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sure.
there could very well be, it could very well be reproduction stuff out there.
Yeah, some course movements for them.
Moving forward, G on YouTube asked, can you talk about the pros and cons of lunchbox lockers? I'm rebuilding a 79 Dana 30 to swap into my 66 CJ5 Frankenstein build. It's dedicated hunting camp wheeling rig. All right, now this one might have me because I'll show my ignorance on you wheeler guys. I'm not sure what a lunchbox locker is. Pros and cons of lunchbox lockers. I'm not sure I can answer that.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean,
We'll have to add that one to our terminology.
maybe it must be like a posse or something. Maybe.
It's the
79 Dana. That's a small Dana.
we'll have our tech rep if you want to, out there, right? He'll let us know what lunchbox lockers are, and it may very well be an affordable like locker rear end kind of thing. Is that kind of what he's after? I'm rebuilding a 79 Dana 30, which would be an affordable locking rear end. Drop-in locker.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The it's dedicated hunting camp. What are okay? Can you talk about the pros and cons? I'm not, and I'm probably not the person to ask, I guess. I know you did a bunch of wheeling back in the day.
It just depends on what he's using. I mean, on a 30, it's got to have small axles, so I wouldn't be running too big of tires on, especially with a locker, because you're twisting. I mean, those are small, those small axles on a Dana 30.
What's that?
It's a locker.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
It's an add-in.
the carrier.
Yep.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. You've got us due on exactly on in-depth detail on the lockers because we're just not we're kind of in the street.
It's a great idea if you're putting one in because if you're four-wheeling, you want them locked. I mean, but it's just gonna put more stress on your axles, especially if you have big tires. And the 30's got some small axles in it.
Yeah.
I was running Dana 60s in my F100. And that thing had 38s on it. And never broke nothing except for that stupid drive shaft in between the transfer case and transmission. It was old school stuff, but yeah, 4-wheeling's fun.
David on YouTube writes, broken clock work twice each day.
That's right.
They give you probably the right time twice each day.
That's a good one.
Twice a day, they're always right. Yeah, that's how. Yeah,
We'll tell Tim, yeah, your clock works right.
yeah. Tim, don't.
It works all the time. You just got to connect the battery at the right time.
Okay, it's getting that time. Okay, boom.
You haven't heard that story?
I know, because he unplugged it every year. It takes his battery out.
Okay, we have a question that came in, and go ahead, guys. If you got any questions, fire them off. We've got some questions that also came in via email, and I'm going to get to some of those right now. And he didn't give me his name. He writes, I have a 67 Mustang 289. I would like to start to remove part by part and have them chromed and then replace the one at a time. Is this doable? Yeah, it's doable. You might find that, most chrome shops will give you a little better rate if you bring in like a pile of parts, and usually when it comes down to, especially on a car like a 67 Mustang that has so much reproduction stuff available out there, some of the parts are going to be just darn spendy to have done, and reproduction, good quality reproduction. Now Terry's going to roll his eyes at this.
Too late. It doesn't matter. It's already the damage is done.
Start talking about reproduction.
Good quality reproductions are available out there. Not all reproduction parts are the same, but good quality reproduction parts are available out there that have beautiful chrome work and beautiful detail and everything else that look every bit as nice as the originals. And you can buy the whole part new for less than you can have an existing part plated.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not the original part that came on the car.
Might be a whole set.
And we'll let Terry answer that question.
No, leave me out of it. If you're gonna chrome it, it's not original anymore, right? So what's the difference?
That's
Do
true.
whatever.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
But I would agree you're probably cheaper to do a bunch of them, but I can understand, funds will do what you can when you can do it.
Yeah. Sometimes it's, it's still, trying to find the best way to get it as much done as you can. And sometimes, maybe just hold off a while and just get a few parts out to be plated, or just decide, hey, here's the 5 worst parts, and I've done cars like this, I have cars that are all together that I go, oh, this isn't nice, but I have so many other parts that are in worse shape. So I think this part is usable until I can, get around to, sending this one out. You can find ways to economize and budget parts. Some parts, can get by without replacing right away. And some parts, you just look at them and go, oh, there's no way I can put this on my car. So unless you have unlimited funds, which is always nice, wish that would happen to me someday. But for the most part, guys have to make decisions about, what's either what's acceptable and what, or what part. Sometimes I'll say this part comes off easy, so I can get that plated at any times. But if it's a part that I know it's going to get buried in, or it's part of a, window frame, blah, 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 and it's going to be a big hassle to replace it, to take it out and replace it later without scratching my car. Yeah, a lot of times I'll send that out and get it replated. That way, if I can take the easy off parts later and get those plated too. And sometimes I just do it by, this one part's not too noticeable. Nobody's going to really notice it. So it's all about, you make compromise. There's a lot of compromise sometimes in building an entire car. Again, unless you have unlimited funds and everything gets done at once.
Yeah.
And you still want to be able to enjoy your car. That'd be nice.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
That'd be nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
you chime in over here.
Oh, G says, no worries. It's a locker for the front, but it just replaces the spider gears. Cheap option compared to the big full lockers. Oh, cool.
I mean, it's going to be a little stronger, but the axles are still pretty small. On a 30, just don't run too big of tires, because then you'll start breaking axles. But yeah, those spiders are pretty wimpy on a 30. So.
All right. John writes, he has a question regarding welding floor pan, lap welding. What size wire do you use to be able to weld as constant as you are on sheet metal? I'm running 025 and I can only put a dot on, waiting for it to cool. I dot, skip 3 to 5 inches, dot again, then go back and overlap to fill the seam. I'm assuming you're thinking, well, as soon as you start, if you're building up too much heat too fast, making it so you can only put a dot. If you're saying I can't run like you usually can run like 1-inch stitches and stuff like that, or if it's in a floor, you're usually doing plug welding on lap weld. But normally you should be able to run like 1 inch, and if you're blowing through, a lot of times that's more of a function of you got your heat set too high, because you only need enough penetration to penetrate the sheet metal. You don't want to be blowing through. If you're blowing through, you're running too hot. Yeah, as soon as you start running the bead, you're building up heat in the panel. So yeah, it's not uncommon to do stitch welding where you do like 1/2 inch and then you skip 4 inches and do a 1/2 inch, and then skip 4 inches and do a 1/2 inch, and then keep coming back and then filling in the gaps inch at a time. That's a common practice. If you are in 1-inch weld, if suddenly you're building up enough heat to blow through, or anything over just a tack, as you mentioned, just a spot, then I suggest turning down the heat setting on your MIG welder, and maybe even cutting back on your wire speed some, so you're not building up too much weld, but you're not blowing through the metal. I would, try to find a nice, get some test scraps, find some, you can go down to most metal supply places, you can pick up a piece of 18 gauge or 20 gauge or whatever, and to practice on, and just trying to, I would just kind of cut it in strips and just kind of start tacking them together and trying to find a place where you're comfortable. Not and also what's going to affect it is your gun speed. Some guys start to want to just sit and boil in the welds, and a lot of times on sheet metal, that's the trickiest thing to weld. Welding 1/8 inch plate or welding 1/4 inch plate and frame rails and stuff like that. That's easy stuff. You've got a big grace period in there. Sheet metal is not very forgiving. So, when my son was learning it in school, they would spend weeks learning just process of, and he said they'd cut coupons, like little 2x4 inch little coupons, and they would practice, and then they'd just start welding those things together. When they got several of them together, then they'd chuck the whole works in, but the instructors would come around and they would evaluate them on gun speed and welder settings as heat and wire speed, and they all work together. Both the gun travel speed, the gun angle, whether you're preheating or you're post-heating your weld, so the angle affects it. There's a lot of things that can affect it. Do your research, find a way that and I've seen dozens of guys weld different ways, and each has their own techniques. Is one way necessarily all that much better than the other? Yeah, people find a way that works. When we toured Art Morrison's shop out in Tacoma. I was surprised when he, well, I assumed everything was TIG welded there, and I walked into the place and I go, well, everybody's using MIG welder. And he goes, yeah, we don't have a TIG welder in the shop. He says, basically when we hire a welder, we almost want them not to know how to weld. We want to train them to our method of welding because we do things a little different, because we found the best way that gives us the most strength and control and everything else. But for just sheer production speed time, they could do it faster with MIG welding as opposed to TIG welding. So, is there one way to MIG weld? No, there's more than one way to MIG weld. But, do some practice, get some metal and start figuring out what you need to make it work would be my recommendation.
Practice. Yep.
Practice. Do
Definitely
it over and over and over again.
Yep.
Then you get, as soon as you find out what works, then you find, and don't just do, when I say practice, just don't do the same thing over and over again. Try changing things up, change your gun speed, your heat settings, your wire, and see how different things react. We got a question from Adam Wrights. Hey guys, I've got a 1970 Cutlass that I bought a couple of years ago. I didn't grow up around cars, and I'm trying my best to learn as I go. We all are. Yeah. And on that point, if we ever get into a subject and you guys got some expertise in any one of these areas, don't be afraid to pipe up. We always see this as sort of a give and take kind of conversation. We've all got our own sets of experiences, but we're welcome to advice from anybody. If they have something to add to the conversation, feel free to join in.
Yeah.
All right, back to your question, Adam. I'm sorry, I get sidetracked all the time. I didn't grow up around cars, and I'm trying my best to learn as I go. My car often won't start after it's been sitting a few days. If I don't use starter fluid, what do I think is the main issue causing it? So he needs to give it a boost of fuel to get it to start.
Quadrajet.
Probably is a quadrajet, but celery pump or choke.
Well plugs leaking. Your bowl's going dry.
Yeah.
Yep, they're
once it
very well
fills up,
known for that.
Once it fills up, it should
Yeah,
start.
cranks well, get the fuel pump, they pump some gas in there. Well, the starter fluid is just making a fire right away.
Yeah, but choke.
Chances
not
are
shutting
it's
or
a
accelerator
quadrajet,
pump.
and they're very well known for leaking well plugs and
Yeah, and what Terry is so eloquently saying is, the carburetor on the traditional engine or carburetor on a 70 Cutlass would be a quadrajet.
If it's a 4-barrel.
If it's a 4-barrel or Rochester
could be a
2-barrel.
Rochester 2-barrel.
Rochester 2-barrel.
And they're known for leaking fuel down out of the carb when they're just sitting. That's sort of what they do.
They do.
And when the fuel leaks down, it gets, eventually either it leaks down into the intake, and then of course it evaporates and hot engine, blah, blah, blah. Eventually it goes all the way. And especially if it's been sitting a few days, your fuel bowls are going to be dry. So when you go to crank the engine, you basically don't have any fuel there to start it. So it's got to crank because it's got a mechanical fuel pump. It's got to crank several times to get the fuel to fill back up into the carburetor. And that's why your starting fluid's working, is the fact that you're just artificially bypassing it. So it'll start to run faster and fill up the carburetor faster. But you may want to rebuild your carburetor.
But you can find out real quick after it's been sitting for a few days. Open up your choke and give it a pump. Give your accelerator pump a pump. If it's not squirting gas, it's dry.
Yeah, either that, you got a bad.
And then if it is, then it's probably something else. But chances are that's not the case, because as soon as you get starter fluid, it's firing.
Yep.
Could be
If
other
it's dry, if you're not getting anything, if you're not going to squirt, now it could be the pump's bad too.
Right.
But you might probably get something if there's fuel. I mean, you probably get something just from that mass pushing down.
Maybe, also make sure your choke blade's shut too. I mean, that's a lot of it too. If you're,
I mean, wait, is it firing right away? I mean, the next day, or the same
Yeah.
day is it working, or is it only after a few days? You can put, if it isn't squirting, take some gas and put it in the vent tube, fill the bowl up a little bit, and hit it again, and then try to start to see if it. I mean, you should be able to tell it right away if your garb's dry.
or just do it after it's warm. Run, look in there, see if it's pumping right.
Yeah, I mean, if it starts up after a little while after you shut it down, while it doesn't get a chance to evaporate
That'll
out
tell you
or
it's
drip
not
out.
not the accelerator pump that way.
Yeah, right. There you go. But yeah, it's not uncommon, not at all.
Yeah.
Yep, and it's kind of a
GM
problem that
thing.
it's prone to those carburetors.
Yeah.
Which is why probably a lot of them got replaced over the years.
Part of the reason.
But there are if you're dead set on keeping your car 100% original, I would suggest either you may want to rebuild your carburetor. Yeah, and I'll avoid the part where we just put in an aftermarket carburetor.
You rebuilt yours how many times?
Yeah, I rebuilt my White Gas Barbell 3 times, and it was like put an Edelbrock on there. It runs much better.
Yeah.
All right.
Technology.
Richard on YouTube writes, I have a 1937 Pontiac Master in decent shape, but needing restoration. What are the pros and cons of switching it over to 12-volt system versus keeping my 6-volt system in an effort to keep it original? It's pros and cons. Basically on a car of 1937 vintage, everything has to, there's a lot of things that have to change. There's not a lot of electronic gauges, although there is some like alternator or voltage meter. You can put voltage reducers to your gauges. All of the bulbs need to be switched to 12 volt. Otherwise, you'll blow all of your bulbs right away. They'll be like flash bulbs. They 6-volt bulbs do not run on 12 volts. Your starter will run fine, however. It'll run a little faster, and your starter runs intermittently. It runs for 30 seconds tops, maybe, or 15 or 20 seconds. It'll run faster on 12 volt. But you won't have any issues. Everything about a 6-volt is like heavier gauge because we're all worried about losing, having line loss. So usually all the 6-volt wires in a car are heavier gauge than what you'll find in most 12-volt cars. So usually the wiring, as long as it's in good shape, is not an issue. 37 would have been natural rubber covered with cloth. It would be the original wiring. The original wiring in a 37 car may appear fine. It may not be fine. A lot of times that rubber starts to dry out. It just crumbles underneath the cloth insulation. It's not always readily apparent, and it becomes more of a fire hazard. I'm a big proponent on replace, and there's somebody replace all the wiring in your car on when they get, if it's dang near, 90 years old, it's probably a good idea to replace the wiring anyways, so you don't have thousands of dollars in your beautiful restored 37 Pontiac and suddenly have, a Roman candle in your driveway because your wiring shorted out and there's not a lot of fuses in a 1937 Pontiac car. So I'm a big proponent of replace the wiring, and this is where, you know, some guys, the purists, will get upset with me. Adding fuse, but you can add fuse protection to circuits under your dash, whereas nobody will ever see it, but at least your car won't self-destruct. There are a lot of cars, you know, up until late 50s, before fuse panels came in, a lot of cars didn't have a lot of fuses. Right. You know, this 57 on the rack behind me has 2 circuit breakers for the entire car. And that's great if you have a 30 amp circuit breaker. It's great if, you know, if you have a major fault, it will pop. But like anything smaller than that, a small short in a dome light doesn't always necessarily create a 30 amp resistance break. So you have to worry about things like starting the car on fire. I always propose, you know, when possible, add, you know, fuse panels are readily available for a lot of classic cars. And you can change the electrical components in your car, so you can separate them into circuits, and you can have separate smaller fuses, so you're not like, you don't have the fire risk. But is there any major issues to converting your car from 6 to 12? You know, you will need a 12 volt generator or 12 volt alternator. Not a lot of 12 volt generators out there, and the generators are so huge, and they don't use, although like companies like PowerMaster make a 12 volt alternator that has all the efficiency and power of a 12 volt alternator, but they look like a generator. And so PowerMaster has a great looking product like that. It still maintains the look of an original generator, yet has all the functionality of an alternator. So you don't have that. You see a lot of guys running the GM alternator. A new GM alternator in a classic car just always seems kind of out of place to me. To me, it's like the kind of thing where you have to disguise it. And I do like the PowerMaster Power Gen alternators because they look like generators, and you can get them in just, you know, satin black and all that stuff. So it's not a big issue. Other than that, fusing, wiring, bulbs. You can put voltage. You can get a Napper, your auto parts store, voltage restrictors that will cut the power from 12 to 6. So if you have some accessory that has to run on 6 volts, like a old tube radio, if you have an old tube radio or something in there that has to run on 6 volts, you can get a voltage reducer that will cut it down from 12 to 6. Yeah, is it a good idea? I'm torn on that one. Should you do it? Depends how much you're going to use it and drive it. If you're going to drive that car regularly, I'd suggest, if you're going to put a lot of miles on it, I'd say do it.
Definitely wiring.
Yeah.
I mean, stick with a 6 volt, but I would redo the wiring for sure.
Yeah.
You got one up top.
I got it moved up. Let's see. Adam writes, another question. I watched your video on installing high torque mini starter, and the install went pretty smooth. My Cutlass has a 350 volt with headers. My question is, do you think this is going to cause a lot of problems or on the install? Also, what other potential problems would you think could pop up with the install, having to use a shim, etc.? Wow, we've got a lot of starter knowledge right here, recent too. I'll let you start, Terry, on this one.
Me?
Yeah.
I didn't put a high torque starter in. Mini starter.
Yeah.
That's what Ross wanted me to do, but I fought him on it.
You gotta keep original.
Well, originally, so I had a hot crank issue where after the car was hot, you try to crank started afterwards, they cranked really slow. So a slow, hot crank where it just seemed like the battery was dead.
Mhm.
Once it cooled down, no problem. And we had a little internal battle going back and forth here. And I thought my starter was actually original to my car. It turned out that it was not. So it was easier for me to just go get a rebuild and swap it out, which solved my problem. And it's never cranked as fast as as long as I've had it, it's never cranked as fast as it is now.
So
With a standard starter.
in your case, you got a standard starter at
Napa.
Napa.
It's just a rebuilt GM.
Just a
AC Delta.
rebuilt. And how did you determine yours was not the original starter in the car?
So I was able to see enough of the part number on the starter just from looking down in there and taking my phone camera and getting a piece of it. And I knew what the part number was supposed to be, and there's a date code on them too. And it was not the right part number, and it was a 1973. So it's 68 Firebird. It was a 1973 starter. So at that point, I'm like, I'm not committed to it. So I just found a rebuilt starter. I already stopped at a local shop that does rebuild alternator starters, and I wanted to see what the turnaround was on it, and he said, hey, bring it in on Monday, you'll have it back on Thursday. So he was going to rebuild my original starter, but turns out I didn't need it.
Yep.
I just got one from the parts store, and it was cheaper that way too, but not that mattered. But so not a mini high torque starter. No, it was just and I have cast iron long branch manifolds. They don't have headers, and it's factory.
So you don't have the heat problem.
Well, it's right next to it, but
One pipe.
well, it's the one that it's the pipe that they all go into right next to the starter. And on those, they had a heat shield on the solenoid, and I don't have that on it. But.
Okay, Ross, what's your thoughts on guys converting to a mini
I
high
was
torque?
doing it in a minute.
I'm gonna save time. Yes.
They're so much easier to put in
Yeah.
and smaller. They're not even close to your headers. You will not have a problem putting it in. I mean, they're simple and they work excellent. I've got,
And
13.5 to 1 compression in my Chevelle, and it turns it over like nothing.
Yeah, and especially in a real high compression engine, it only makes sense because the factory starters, you're just really working them to turn a 13 to 1 compression motor over. And you already know what I'll do because I did it on my wife's car. The original 57 DeSoto starter is roughly the size of a 1980 Buick. It's massive, and it has its own gravitational pull. It's that size, and
It is
the process of lifting it up and putting it in there every time became a real workout. So when I expected to have some issues either with, the Mopar starters don't shim like the GM does. Is shimming an issue? We can discuss that, but as far as the new starter compared to the old starter, the new high torque mini starter, much lighter. I can put that in one-handed. It takes there's so much more room around it now than there used to be. It turns the engine over 3 times faster than the old one did. And essentially the car, 90% of this car looks stock. When you walk up to it and look at the car, it looks stock. Unless you really know what you're looking for. And because that Hemi goes wheel well to wheel well, front to back, nobody's ever going to see that starter under there at the car show unless they crawl underneath the car. And so my thought was, it doesn't matter. And I would rather have the reliability and know that my engine's going to always start and not have to lug around that huge starter all the time that eventually would need to be rebuilt. And then I'd have to find they'd probably charge me by the pound for copper to rewind that thing. And then I'd need a new mortgage for that. So my vote would be, yes, go with the high torque starter. You'll be happy with it. I know I am. But if you're a real purist into the originality, into the details, and making sure every part is as it was delivered, then yeah, go ahead and have your current starter rebuilt.
He's got headers, so.
But he's got headers,
Yeah.
so he's already made some, performance upgrades.
Yeah.
So I think you'll find that the high torque starter will take up less space. You'll have
Yes.
fewer problems, and you'll be happy you did it down the road.
Definitely. And shimming, I don't know. I mean, it just depends on if your starter was shimmed. That's a matter of where that gear is kicking out into. If it, hits a fly, well, yeah, you have to shim it. But usually it's nothing.
Yeah. Sometimes the starter needs to be shimmed just so it'll clear the gears. You got to move it down so it'll clear the gears. So it actually, I've had them where it didn't clear, and then it just drives that Bendix into the flex plate, bing, and then you get that like loud ringing noise, bing, 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 and it doesn't want to go in. But yeah, you'll know if you need the edge shimmed, and it's always good, if it's a new starter, new setup. It's always good to, after it's been in the car for a couple weeks, to pull it down and just check the gears, make sure everything's not grinding or wearing weird or anything. Make sure your Bendix and your starter is not wearing weird. Make sure your flywheel or your flex plate are not wearing weird. You can't always, on an automatic, in some cases, you get an inspection cover and you can get down and you can actually check it without having to pull the starter. Depends on the engine. Some cars you can, some cars you can't. You have very little access to see what's going on. She writes, welding is the next big thing I want to learn for the hobby. TIG, MIG, or stick. Stick kind of, if you're doing farm equipment or construction equipment, stick, that's sort of old school at this point. There's still some guys that swear by stick, but that's not where you want to go. MIG is the easiest to learn. TIG gives you the most precise control of your heat and fill and everything else and we've got some new videos on the site from the guys at Contour Academy Workshop. They've done a good thing. They've got one video out there shows you how to butt weld two pieces of metal together with using no fill rod and just using a TIG welder to fuse the two panels together. And then they're able to finish out the panel, and as he shows in the video, you can do it so you can flex the panel, and that there is no, it doesn't want to crease or bend or anything, and that's how he knows he has a good weld, because he can actually flex the panel that far, and it doesn't form a crease where that weld is. So he seamlessly fused the panels together. TIG is the best. But it takes, basically you're controlling your arc. You got a foot feed to control the temperature. You've got when you do add fill rod. So you basically got it's kind of like you're running your foot in this hand and this hand. And it takes time to learn to do well. But if you take the time to learn to do it well, you'll never do it with anything else. My son rarely picks up a MIG welder because he says I have more control to do nicer welds with my TIG, and he does. But a lot of that is practice. He does it over and over again. And let's see, Robert, should you put filler material Bondo on bare metal and then epoxy primer, or the epoxy prime first and then the filler? Oh, this is a good question. One that people
that's debated a lot.
I know.
I would recommend epoxy, filler, epoxy, sandwich it in between epoxy. Yeah. You can do it either way.
I know.
But I would
I
recommend
know there are guys that will profess, body filler has to go on bare metal. I say epoxy primer put on. They have such a great bond that I feel that I always do. I epoxy everything just so I don't have to worry about flash rust. And I don't have to worry because bare metal oxidizes. So normally when I'm working on car, I epoxy primer everything. Unless I know I have to do a lot of butt welding in the area, then I don't epoxy prime anything. Then wait. I'd rather do that kind of welding and then come back because I don't want to have to try to get epoxy primer off before I can do a weld. But for just doing body filler, yeah, I go epoxy, body filler, and then I after I'm done with all my filler coats and everything else, then I use the epoxy over everything as a sealer.
Yeah. If you go directly to metal with your filler and you leave it in filler for a while, that filler is going to absorb moisture and it's going to wick right down that metal and it'll rust underneath it. You won't even see it. Epoxy it first. I mean, I would epoxy it first. Every day in collision shops, not really the case, but they're not sitting open.
Right.
You know, it's every once in a while I get pushed outside in the winter or when it's raining, you got some problems then.
Mm-hmm.
But typically in a body shop, they do not get epoxy first. There are some like Toyota that will recommend, or that's their process, epoxy first, then filler. But I would epoxy first, then put filler over it, then epoxy it again. Sandwich it.
Okay, and Adam, you're going to get the last question of the night.
Clarifying it.
Adam writes, with the starter fluid question, for clarification, it's a 4-barrel Edelbrock car. Now we bashed all over the Rochester Quadrajets. Now you're going to give us that valuable little tidbit, Adam.
Yeah.
That's all right. Sometimes it won't fire without starter fluid after I've been driving it and I go to fill up the car at the gas station. Spray a little fluid and it fires again. It sounds to me it could very well be just an accelerator pump. So when he goes to like pump it to start it, it's not getting any fluid. When it's been sitting for a bit, the car won't fire just by pump. The car won't fire just by pumping the gas pedal.
If
the accelerator pump is bad, though, you can pump all day and it's not going to do anything.
Just
usually if you
move it and see if you
shut it off to go to a gas station, it shouldn't even have to be pumped.
No, you shouldn't. But that's why I'm thinking vapor lock. If it's hot.
If it's hot, depending on temperature.
Yeah. Vapor lock?
Yeah.
If it won't start right away. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And it cranks.
Yeah, well, so maybe you need like what they call them I'll make it sound really perverse now. There's a carb spacer that's non-heat conductive, and that might be a good way to keep the heat out of your carb so it doesn't boil out the fuel if it's a heat issue. My other thought would be, make sure that accelerator pump's working. It's easy enough to do. Open up, take your air cleaner off, and pump it and see if it squirts. Not with the engine running. It could be just sitting there.
Especially if it won't start after you shut it off.
Yeah.
It's hot,
if he says he's pumping and pumping and it's not getting anything, he should be like squirting a shitload of gas in there. I would think that he could get that. If it was, I still would want to check the accelerator pump, make sure it's squirting, and if it is, then maybe there's a heat issue with the carb, or the fuel is dissipating.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks again, guys, for everybody coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. A lot of great questions. We've come to expect that. You guys are really good about it. Again, down below here, there's our guide to classic car terminology. There is not the term lunchbox lockers in there. We'll see if we can fix that.
It's a new one.
as we learn something new all the time. Again, thanks guys. Great back and forth. Appreciate all the questions. Appreciate you guys all coming up. Been a lot of fun. Again, we'll see you next month. And now get out in the garage, work on them cars, and then
Right.
also don't be afraid to get to the car shows.
That's right.
See ya.
Yeah.